Let's deploy the Elasticsearch Sink Connector to move data from a StreamNative Cloud topic to an Elasticsearch index. We will start by preparing the Elasticsearch cluster by verifying the server version, getting the Elasticsearch URL, and creating a new role and user with access to only certain indices. Then we will prepare our StreamNative Cloud cluster and deploy the Elasticsearch Sink Connector. Here I am in my Elasticsearch UI, and I've deployed a version 7 of Elasticsearch. And that's important because version 8 is not yet supported by the Elasticsearch Sink Connector for StreamNative Cloud. I will include a link to documentation where you can check that for the latest version, but for now we're going to have to make sure that we're using version 7. If I go ahead and click on Manage for this deployment, I also want to copy the Elasticsearch URL. And that here is next to Elasticsearch, say copy endpoint. And we're going to be using that a little bit later when we deploy the Elasticsearch Sink Connector. Now I want to go ahead and manage this deployment to create a new user and role. So I can either go to Open Cabana here, or on the previous page, if you click Open, it'll also go to the same page. First up, I'm going to be creating a new role. So here at the top under Search Elastic, I'm going to type in role. And under security roles, I'm going to say create a new role. The role I'm going to call SN role. And it needs index privileges. I'm going to give it privileges on any index that starts with SN, because that's the name of the index I'm going to be used to be publishing from the Elasticsearch Sink Connector. And for now, I'm just going to give it all privileges, but on this restricted set of indices. I'm then going to say create role. Next, I'm going to create a user and provide it that role. So I'm going to type in user at the top, and I can go to security users and create new user. And I'm going to say SN user, and then we will need to give it a password. We're going to be using that password when deploying the Sink Connector. And then under roles, I'm going to go ahead and find my SN role so that when that user logs in, it's going to then be allowed to have all privileges on any indice that starts with SN. I'll click Create User, and then we're actually done preparing our Elasticsearch cluster, and we're going to move over to preparing our cluster on StreamNative Cloud. We have some prerequisites we need to complete on our StreamNative Cloud before we can deploy the Elasticsearch Sink Connector using Pulsarctl. The first is create a service account for running the Sink Connector and create the service account binding using SNCtl. I've provided a link in the description to a video that shows exactly how to create this service account and a service account binding. You then need to create a tenant and namespace and provide that service account that has the binding, produce, consume, and syncs permissions on the namespace using Pulsarctl. The video is linked in the description for this as well, but that video provides produce, consume, and function permissions where you'll need to provide produce, consume, and syncs permissions. Where consume and syncs permission alone, not produce, might be enough because we're not going to be using that service account to produce to topics on StreamNative Cloud. We'll now continue this video by using Pulsarctl to create the sink. To start, we need to log into Pulsarctl using the service account that has the service account binding. To get the code to log into your cluster using Pulsarctl, we'll go to the StreamNative Cloud UI. Here I am in the StreamNative Cloud UI, making sure I've selected my cluster, my instance and cluster. I'll go over to Pulsar Clients, click on CLI Tools, Pulsarctl, click Next. Here's where if you are unfamiliar with Pulsarctl, you can download and install Pulsarctl, but I've already done that myself, and I'll include another link in the description that has more instructions on how to download and install Pulsarctl. I'll select my service account that I know has the service account binding, and for me that's Sources Syncs Service Account. And then I'm going to be connecting using OAuth 2, so I'm going to download that key and I move that into a folder on my desktop called My Files. Then under Client Configuration, I go ahead and copy out this code. The admin service URL, issuer endpoint, and audience are already pre-populated, and all I need to do is replace the key file, and I'm going to use a relative path to this file that I just downloaded, making sure to also copy Pulsarctl OAuth 2 activate. So let me click copy on this code. And here I've pasted in that code into terminal. All I've edited is that key files section where I've done a ./myfiles and a reference to that file I had downloaded from the UI. And then I'm in the desktop folder, so this myfiles is relative to that. I've also made sure to include the pulsarctl OAuth 2 activate. And you should see context training modified or context training set. Mine says modified because I had created this context previously. And then it should say that you're logged in with that account that you have the service account binding for. At this point, we're ready to deploy the Elasticsearch Sink Connector using pulsarctl, but we need to build out the pulsarctl command that we need to do that. I have an example of the pulsarctl sinks create command that we're going to use to actually create our Elasticsearch Sink Connector. The part above the sink config flag is going to be pretty much very similar for all of the connectors that you create. And then the sink config is going to be specific to the particular sink or source that you are creating. So you'll either have a sink config or a source config, depending on what type of connector you're making. So for pulsarctl sinks create, we're going to be using the built-in version of Elasticsearch that comes with StreamNative Cloud. It's going to be deployed into the tenant elastic tenant and the namespace elastic namespace. The inputs are, topic is going to be elastic tenant, elastic namespace, elastic input. So we're going to publish messages to that topic for our testing. The sink itself, we're naming myElasticSync, and the subscription name that gets created on our input topic is myElasticSub. For the sink config, which is specific to the type of connector that we are creating, we need the elasticSearchUrl, which we got out of the Elasticsearch website. The index name is the name of the index that we're going to be creating to write our data to. And I've started that with SN because we've only provided this username and role with permissions on indexes that start with SN. Here I've put in my username that I created on the Elastic website and the password. And then schema enables true because I'm going to be publishing an Avro type object to my input topic. And then create index if needed is also set to true because it's going to auto create the SN index for us. And then here I've pasted in that code into terminal. I'm going to execute it. And it says created myElasticSync successfully. Going over to the UI, I've already selected my instance and cluster and then selected my tenant, Elastic Tenant, and Elastic Namespace. Then clicked on the Connectors tab here, and it shows that myElasticSync is now deployed and says that it's ready. If I also go over to Topics, I can go to Elastic Input, and we'll be able to see that there's a subscription called myElasticSub and this is for the connector that we just created. Next, we need to test our connector by publishing some messages to this topic. As I'd mentioned, I'm going to be publishing Avro objects, which is why I enabled schema for the Sink Connector. Here I have some sample producer code, and I'm going to be publishing message to the Elastic Tenant, Elastic Namespace, Elastic Input, and I'm just using a different service account. I'm using mine that has the full super user permission, but since we did add produce permissions for the service account that we created, we could also use that service account, and you should be able to produce messages to that input topic. Now I've imported an object called data model, which has two types on it, or two fields. One is a string field called type, and another is numerical of some sort called value. And I've created my producer to have a data model and a schema avro data model.class. And here I'm producing that message to that input topic. So I'm going to go ahead and run that Elastic code, and we'll produce that one message. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at our connector and our input topic to verify that it has sent over Elastic. And then we're going to head on over to Elastic and go ahead and find our data. So here I am back over in StreamNative Cloud UI with my instance and cluster selected, my tenant and namespace selected, and I've clicked on connectors on the left. You can see that one message has been sent to the sink. If I go to topics and go to Elastic Input, under my subscription, I have no backlog. So let's go ahead and now head on over to Elastic and see what this data looks like there. So here in Elastic, I'm going to go to Discover. And then under this tab here, under Change Index Pattern, I'm going to go to a pattern and look for all indexes that start with SN star. And here it's going to find all indexes that start with SN. And you can see I've been playing with this before. So there's some indices like SNInd3 and SNInd4. But for the SN index, this is the one that was automatically created by our Sink connector. You can see that the data point that we had sent from IntelliJ into our input topic and then passed over to Elasticsearch with the Elastic Sink Connector, there's that value of my type, that's the string, and then the value was 11. And then again, that's in the index that was automatically created by our Elasticsearch Sink Connector.